So, all
Gotcha.
right, you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Thank you for watching. I'm here with Ryan Tanaka of your Neuropod. We're going to talk about Neuralink. I got a lot of stuff to go through. Ryan has a hard out in about an hour and 20 minutes, so this is going to be an hour and 20 minutes long, and we're done. So I will try to leave 20 minutes at the end to answer audience questions, but I do have a lot of questions for myself and for my Patreon supporters. Ryan has agreed to do this again if it goes well, and I don't annoy him too much. So let's get started. Ryan, you seem to be very excited about Neuralink. Can you, for starters, for the people who don't know, and by the way, if you're watching this after it's live, I'll put chapters in so you know where to go to get past this if you already know. But Ryan, what is Neuralink? Just so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I definitely am very excited about Neuralink, and thank you for having me on the channel. Um, so Neuralink is a small company. It's notably um, part of Elon's whole master plan, I suppose. Um, and he's involved along with Max Hodak and some others. And basically, the goal of the company is to merge man with machine. And they'll do that by basically implanting a chip into the brain, and then by having that chip inside, you can connect that to a computer and almost have access to that computer in a way that we similarly do right now. However, the interface between the two would be extremely quick, and that would provide tons of different benefits. And the thing that I'm most excited about is the potential to cure different neurological diseases. And then additionally, after that, they'll probably get into more sci-fi-esque type of uses. And those
Oh,
will also be very exciting.
yeah, we're going to talk about that. So before we go forward, I don't want to forget this. I want to thank the Vasa law firm in Sweden and all my Patreon supporters for helping this channel grow. Ryan, do you have? And there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Ryan, you also have Patreon, right?
I do. Yeah,
So there's a
patreon.com
well, so
slash
there's
neuropod.
there's a link in the description below to Ryan's channel. I think there's a link to his Patreon in every one of his videos, and he has some great videos about Neuralink. So please support people like Ryan. Hopefully support people like me. And I'm wearing my Boring Brain t-shirt to celebrate both the Boring Company and Neuralink. So Ryan, how did you get interested in Neuralink?
Yeah. So I guess I had been exposed to like Elon Musk and just knowledgeable about the things that he's been working on for quite some time. Um, and then because of that, I started to catch wind of this small company that he was part of. Uh, and I guess it was first, I was first interested in his involvement in OpenAI. And then eventually I learned that he was also involved in a different company called Neuralink, and then just started really learning more about what they were about. They did that public launch event in 2019, and that was when I really thought, like, wow, there's a huge disconnect between the potential that this company has compared to what the public knows about it. And so I guess that was sort of the inspiration for me to start Neuropod, was just to try to get more people interested in the company and just aware of what the future could hold. And obviously, like anything that Elon gets to be a part of, it has a high probability of success. And so I just assumed that eventually there will be many podcasts and YouTube channels that are talking about Neuralink. And if I can be the first one to really just cover the Neuralink news, and then kind of eventually get into more of like the monthly news or weekly news, and maybe even daily news, then it would be sweet to be like a similar channel to Tesla Daily, like how Rob Maurer is for Tesla.
Cool. Okay. So do you have a background that makes you more interested in brain machine interface? We have a family history of Alzheimer's, so I have sort of a personal connection to this, and I'm just an Elon nut. But is there anything in particular, and I'm a science fiction fan too, is there anything in particular in your background that gets you excited, that you feel connects you more to Neuralink and to brain machine interfaces in general?
I don't know, not particularly. I guess I studied civil engineering for undergrad, and then went on to do like an engineering master's. And then I interned at Tesla in 2015 and 2017. And so because of that exposure, I kind of felt closer to Elon, I guess, and just like had more insight into like what the team was doing and could understand like, okay, well, I can see how the team is at Tesla, and I have friends who like I went to school with and they're now at SpaceX, and I can kind of get an understanding of how those teams operate. So then the fact that those teams are probably operating in a similar fashion to how Neuralink is now, I thought that was really interesting. And then I guess just like the primary motivating factor was literally just the potential that Neuralink has to cure things like paralysis or Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, dementia. Like those types of things are just so game changing for any individual person or family or entire community. And it just resonates with me. So because of that, I just keep learning more about the company and learning more about how the brain works.
Okay, so you mentioned civil engineering. Does that mean I should have you on sometime to talk about the Boring Company?
I'm definitely interested in what the Boring Company is doing. I It's weird. Like I don't really have very much experience in civil engineering, because immediately following school, I've never worked a full time job, and so yeah, most of my civil experience and knowledge is just through school and project work. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in it, and would love to talk about it during this conversation.
Another time, not this one. The next one. Okay. So here's one of my big questions. One of the things that I'm excited about with Neuralink and seeing Tesla and Neuralink come together. And I just for those who don't know, I sent Ryan 9 questions and we're on question 4. So we're going to get to my Patreon supporter questions after this. But I'm really excited about Dojo. And I see how Dojo is helping with self-driving. And I feel like Dojo could play a role in making Neuralink work better, or something like Dojo could play a role in making Neuralink work better, to help interpret signals from neurons that are coming out of the brain and maybe to more effectively send the right signals into the brain to the neurons. Do you see a role for that? Do you see a connection there?
I think it's possible. I'm not super knowledgeable about how Dojo works or its true uses.
Well, let me rephrase it to machine learning in general.
Okay. Yes, I definitely feel like there's a way for things like artificial intelligence, neural networks, deep learning, machine learning, any of these things, and different technologies to play into how Neuralink could grow, both like the company itself and the technology itself, the learning of the brain, and then also their financials. To me, one of the most interesting things that I think Neuralink will do is similar to how they have this neural net that's feeding back all the information from Tesla's cars and sending it back to Tesla, and then Tesla's using that information to improve how cars are able to drive on their own. I think it wouldn't surprise me if they're able to do similar things with the brain. So if they have a chip in many people's brains and they have a better sense of which neurons correlate specifically to like different movements or different things that people do, then they could just have all that information fed back to Neuralink, and then they could improve how, like the different signals that are being sent to people's brains in the future if they need those capabilities.
So let me pursue this a little further.
Okay.
So the image I have, did you see Andrej Karpathy's interview on the his interview on the Robot Brains podcast?
I did.
So he talked about FSD is the car's driving down the road and there's an inference chip in the car, and it's identifying objects and it's predicting where they're going to move. And he described something called flicker, when the software identifies an object as a stop sign, and then an instant later it says it's not a stop sign, it identifies it as something else, and it flickers back and forth in identifications. That's a signal to Tesla, to the home office, to the mothership, to Dojo, whatever. Hey, this is a sign that it's not working right here. We need to look at this more closely. And or it predicts that an object's going to move in a certain range and it moves outside the range it predicted. So that's a sign that it's not predicting something well. I could see the same thing applied to signals coming from the brain, that you're reading the brain and you predict something's going to work a certain way, and then the user says, wait a minute, that's not what I wanted. That there's some sort of flag, that's not what I was trying to do. There's some, or there's flicker, like it's detecting signals from the brain in a certain way, but it's confused about what the signal is. That's a sign to learn more. And I love your idea. You added something to it. We can query the fleet. We can query the fleet of other brains and say, hey, are we seeing similar behavior to this? Can we learn from this? So does that make sense? And then the other side of it is, I suppose, when self-driving is telling the car how to steer, at some point it decides, wait a minute, there was a bad result here. Not necessarily a crash, but something didn't go right. And you can query the fleet and figure out how to drive better. Neuralink is both it's reading signals from the neurons, and ultimately, and I don't think yet, it's going to be sending signals into the neurons. So I almost think there can be learning both ways, right? Like, is your impression, by the way, right now, the Neuralink that's in the monkey is not sending signals in, right?
Right. In that demonstration, I believe you're correct. Yeah.
Do we know if it's capable of it and they're just not using the functionality, or?
It'd be all speculation. It wouldn't surprise me if they already have this tested, but just haven't demonstrated it publicly yet.
Yeah. Well, I think there's sort of like, well, what would you do with it? If you're in the motor cortex, what signals would you send in to the motor cortex? I think you would send signals into the optic cortex, the vision, what's it called? The vision cortex?
Visual cortex.
You'd be more likely to send signals into the visual cortex than you would into the motor cortex. So maybe they're not bothering. Okay. So one of my questions, and I think this actually relates to a question that one of my Patreon supporters had.
Okay.
What are prospects for Neuralink for people with brain diseases or other impairments? What do you see as how Neuralink is going to help people in the short run? We have paralysis, but where else do you see Neuralink helping people with specifically with impairments, with diseases and other impairments?
So I guess I'll start with paralysis. There was studies or research conducted by BrainGate, and it's relatively recent. I think it's within the past 10 or 20 years that they discovered that paralyzed people typically are able to have information sent from the brain, but it never ends up getting sent to the specific limb that is trying to be moved. So it's just a matter of like a broken connection. But if you can repair that connection, which Neuralink aspires to do with this brain interface, in combination with like another chip implant, then you can have those two communicating like wirelessly, and then, as Elon terms it, you create a neural shunt, and basically bridge that gap, and then I
think he actually said you would implant another Neuralink chip in the limb or somewhere that directs signals to somewhere below the break in the spine. Is that what you saw?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So it's not just the neural shunt might be a Bluetooth connection from the Neuralink in the brain to the Neuralink that's down where the muscles are?
That's how I understand it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what else besides helping paralysis? What else do you see it helping?
Yeah, so things like Parkinson's disease, where somebody has like no true control over a lot of their muscles. There's already technology out there that has drastically helped like Parkinson's patients. It's called like deep brain stimulation, and that has like 100 electrodes, or on the order of 100 electrodes. So the number of electrodes that Neuralink will be able to implant in the brain is significantly like larger, and therefore they'll be able to have much more detailed information being read and sent to the brain. And because of that, like they can more accurately and easily and precisely control like how somebody's reacting to having that implant. And then it's almost like somebody totally doesn't have any signs of Parkinson's and similar types of diseases.
Okay. So We're going to bounce back and forth now between my next question and the question I just asked you. So you brought up, because my next question is about deep brain issues. And my understanding is that Neuralink goes into the cortex. It only goes like 3 millimeters in. Like you open up the skull and it only goes a tiny bit in. And Parkinson's, you mentioned deep brain stimulation. They have to go deep into the brain to do that. Is it possible to affect the deeper brain by stimulating the cortex?
I think no, but there are many different like areas that they will probably be able to get into eventually. Um, but I suppose it's not a guarantee. Like I think I'm still learning about the brain, but I think there's one part called the brain stem, and yeah, so like if they're able to get into, I think 7 millimeters deep, then they can reach like different areas of the brain, um, including things like the basal ganglia, which I think Max mentioned in one of his tweets fairly recently. And so if they're able to do that, then they kind of unlock a bunch of different things, uh, and that'd be super cool. I think the public would really respond to that. You know, like if they're able to reach certain areas of the brain, and then they can publicly start saying, like, okay, this really has the possibility of curing or minimizing the effects that somebody has from a stroke. Then all of a sudden, like the public will really respond to that.
Okay. Um, so I guess there's other. Well, one of the thoughts I had there was by stimulating the cortex, maybe the deep brain stuff like the Parkinson's is considered involuntary movement, and I was just sort of wondering if you might be able to stimulate the cortex in the right way that it would be able to control movements that we aren't able to control ourselves with our cortex. Like maybe you could stimulate the motor cortex in the right way that would enable you to regain control over something that's involuntary motion. Does that make sense, or is it probably not possible? Or too soon to say?
It might be possible. I mean, I think one of the most important things that Neuralink's going to do is learn about the brain, and that'll kind of unlock this whole world of neurotechnology. Right? Like, there's so many different companies out there that will probably be started the instant that we know like how the brain is working. There's just so much to be learned, and so um, like in fact, in the latest public update event, there's one member of the team, I think he's the director of robotics, and he was saying one of the things that he's most excited for about Neuralink is that they'll basically have this scope into the brain. Like they'll be able to see a lot of things that most other companies aren't able to see, and then they'll be able to learn a bunch of things that most other companies wouldn't be able to learn.
Okay. So I guess the other question is there's other diseases like, personal to me, Alzheimer's. I saw my mother today. My mother has Alzheimer's. I would basically say my mother's Alzheimer's is so profound at this point that she would fail a Turing test. She is arguably not. I mean, she walks around. She goes to meals. She can have a conversation. It's just not much of a conversation. I would argue she's arguably not conscious anymore in the way we normally think of consciousness. Even though she can, say, how's the family? She has mannerisms, but the deeper thought isn't there. Do you think that Neuralink has the hope to help with diseases like Alzheimer's, where we're losing, dementia and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, will be very exciting the instant that they are able to. Um, but yeah, just basically, I think they probably have a better understanding of like what they're going to do and what approach they're going to take to helping with that. But I think there's still quite a bit that they have to learn about the brain before they're able to really like truly make that claim and then execute on it. But in addition to like the challenges of just learning about the brain, they also have to overcome so many other challenges, including things like just learning about material science and thinking about like how the electrodes are going to get placed, what material the electrodes should be, what material the robot should have on it, and then how they design the robot. Like there's so many different components that they need to like iron out, and then once they get through those issues, then all of this may become possible.
Okay, so one of my big questions then is, we talk about Neuralink for helping people with diseases and impairments, but there's also the prospect that Neuralink helps healthy people in some way. So without going to the extremes and crazy ideas, can you describe some ways you think that Neuralink might help healthy people?
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things will be like if we're able to equip our bodies with different sensors, that then we may be able to like connect to those sensors, and then we can almost have like superhuman sight or superhuman hearing, or whatever it is. And there's already like a company that's working on something that's, I don't know, moderately similar to this, in my opinion. It's called Neosensory, and I had been looking into them recently and just did an episode on them. But basically, like what they do is they have this vest that has 32 different uh, uh, things that will vibrate, and then that can translate like the different noise being uh, coming into like that vest, and then it'll translate it into like touch for the user. And so, I mean, the applications with stuff like that are endless, because now all of a sudden, like you're giving this capability to somebody who would normally not be able to hear, and now it's like they can. And then something similar could be said for like seeing infrared, or or um, or hearing different.
Maybe hearing sounds that are out of normal human hearing range?
Yeah, yeah, precisely.
Supervision, super hearing.
Yep. And Neuralink will probably enable similar things.
Somebody asked the question, can Neuralink help Tesla shorts?
I don't want to help the Tesla shorts.
Well, can it help them see the light?
Kind of want them to keep shorting.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, like short more, please.
Okay, so a big question for me. So the Boring Brain shirt came about. By the way, there's a link to the t-shirts below, and Boring Brain shirts available. The Boring Brain shirt came about from this idea that I've been working on about whether I can find a way to invest in the Boring Company and Neuralink. And I think it's probably premature to invest in Neuralink for an outsider. But I think that at some point, I'm just going to talk for a second. I'm terrible at interviewing because I like to talk instead of listen. But
that's perfect. I'm a better listener than talking.
But I see Neuralink and Boring Company both as companies that at some point will scale. Like any startup, at some point it scales. And I personally think Boring Company is closer to scaling than Neuralink. And ultimately, both of them will scale when they need to build the machine that builds the machine. In the case of a Boring Company, it's when they need to build the machine that builds the tunnel boring machine. And with Neuralink, it's when they need to build the machine that builds the Neuralink chips and the machine to build the Neuralink surgical robot. And along with that, when you scale chips, and particularly when you scale robots, you've got to scale and hire teams to operate the robots in all the different places you operate them. So my gut is Neuralink isn't scaling for a while. Do you have the same sense that it's going to be a while before they can scale?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have could you ballpark, like, what do you think it's going to take before they could start to scale?
That's a good question. Well, so I guess the first step is really just like human trials, and that's probably going to happen either later this year or early next year. And then once they're able to do that, then we'll kind of see how that goes, and they'll probably have to do more testing for quite some time. And then, yeah, like even just testing and getting the robot manufacturing ironed out will take quite some time. The processing, yeah, like the chip manufacturing, and then the processing, like the signal processing, will take a lot of time. And then even just like even just the material science problem, I think is such a difficult one, because the brain is so it's like really harsh. It's like salty and it's trying to kill like anything in there. Like any material that gets placed in there, it really has to be able to last for a long time and not be taken out, right? Because you don't want to have an implant and then have to have another surgery. So yeah, I think like being able to overcome a lot of those challenges will take at least 5 to 10 years, probably.
Yeah, that. I'm in that ballpark. So my theory is, first of all, let me ask you this question while we're on this. I think Neuralink's headquarters might move to Austin, Texas. Do you think that's possible?
Definitely. I almost want to say that I heard that somewhere.
I thought I saw they were hiring for like like a building supervisor, somebody to build a building. They're building something on Austin, Texas. Well, why would they be building something in Austin, Texas? And so here, my theory about Neuralink, and I suppose they could be in more than one location, but my theory is that you want your team in one place, probably. I mean, you could have them in two places, but you don't want them spread all over the world. And you're going to have your surgical robot and your chips. And initially, you're doing trials on a small number of people, right? You're doing trials on, well, first of all, you're doing pigs and monkeys. And then let's say you scale up to humans and you do one human, probably. They do a human trial in one human. If it works, then they do a few more humans. At some point, the paralyzed people find out it's working and they all flock to wherever you are. And you get a lot, you have 10, then you have 100. But even when you have 100 patients that you're doing trials on, you don't need a second robot. And you're not producing millions of chips. You're producing 100 chips or 200 chips if you're doing them bilateral. So you don't need to scale yet. So I think that the level of scrutiny that the FDA is going to impose on this kind of human trial, it's probably going to be a minimum of 5 years before you get past 100 patients. And you really, to scale, you probably need more than 1,000 patients before you need the second robot and to produce chips in larger volumes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back to your point about like them moving to Austin, it seems like it makes sense that all Elon Musk related companies would be like in a similar geographic area, because I guess the way I see it is if Boca Chica or somewhere down there, I think it's like Brownsville or somewhere in Texas, is the gateway to Mars, then he definitely kind of needs like all of his companies in a similar area.
Well, and also there's a lot of coordination between Elon's companies, like with material science. The SpaceX material science team helps out SpaceX. The SpaceX material science team helps out Tesla. There's a lot of, sometimes they work together on things, and having them all in one place probably makes it easier to work together on things. And I think to some extent, and you might have a different opinion on this, but I think to some extent, California is not necessarily a favorite. It's a little bit like trying to keep your chip operating in the brain. Keeping your company operating in California is a bit of a challenge. It's a corrosive environment.
Sure.
Maybe that's not fair, but
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and then if he ever merges all four companies, and it becomes X, then
I don't
definitely makes sense.
I don't buy the X.com argument. I don't buy the companies merging. I don't see it. But who knows? No. That's another conversation for another day. So the big question I have, supposing, like in my dreams, I get an investment in Neuralink. Like Neuralink would be probably my top priority of all. If I could get an investment in a company, it's the biggest risk investment, right? Because it might not work, right? I mean, it may have very limited functionality. We think it's going to work. We're pretty hopeful it's going to work, but it just might not work. But if it works, how big is the market?
I hate the term TAM, like total addressable market. It just, it feels like there's a phony ceiling whenever somebody says like TAM, but okay, if we have to like use that term, then it's like pretty much any human, right? Because and then I guess like being a little bit more realistic, it's probably like 1/3 or so people will eventually experience a neurological disease if they don't pass away from like a cardiac issue.
So you're saying the health problems would be a third of the global.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
the health problems alone would be a third of the global population.
Right. And then people are
Oh,
speculating
that's a lot bigger than my number.
well, people are speculating too that like this would basically be the next iteration of like the smartphone. So
Right.
then,
Well, that's
everybody.
Yeah, that's everyone.
Right, and then yeah, it's like everyone, and then I think there's so much more that they can get into. It's not just going to be like implants. I think like yeah, there's just many more verticals that they could.
Okay, random question here. Do you have a dog or cat?
No, I don't.
Did you ever have a dog?
No, I was allergic growing up. Now
Okay.
growing up.
So I have this theory that if I could have a Neuralink in my dog and I would have a Neuralink and we could telepathically communicate with each other, would I want to know what my dog is thinking? I mean, I'd probably need a mute button, right? I want to treat, I want to treat, I want to treat, I want to treat, right? All right, sorry about that. Okay, so that's a little extreme. So, well, so let me just bounce you my market idea off, and I think you're going to say it's bigger than what I thought. I was saying, okay, let's imagine Neuralink scales to treat 10 million people with brain diseases a year and charges $10,000 a piece for the procedure, which I think ultimately Elon wants to get it to be cheaper than that. But if it's 10 million people a year times $10,000, I believe that's $100 billion in revenue. And
Yeah.
I think you're saying it might be 100 million people a year that would have brain diseases that would be treatable. Because if it's a third of 7 billion or a third of 8 billion, let's say it's 2.5 billion people, then it would take a long time at 10 million people a year to get to 2.5 billion. You'd really have to be doing like 25. If you did 250 million people a year, it would take you 10 years to cure everyone with a brain disease. Well, they don't all have brain. They don't have a brain disease at that moment, though, right? They will eventually have a brain disease.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, keep going. Yeah.
No, so if it's 10 million people a year at $10,000, it's $100 billion in revenue. And if it's growing, and you know, I think that's a very, very large company. But I think it may be 100 million people a year or more, and 100 million people a year, that's $1 trillion a year in revenue. And that's, you know, you're talking about like a $10 trillion plus company at that point. Does that make sense in a ballpark?
That would be assuming that they're like capturing everything, right? So I think it's most likely that once they are able to understand quite a bit about the brain, then I guess it's just like better for society if they give that information to other companies and just open source it in the form of like research. And then if they do that, then there's probably a bunch of other like low hanging fruit type companies that could come in and just address some of these like easier to treat diseases. So then I don't know, probably wipes out some of the market cap potential, but I still think the company has humongous potential. If there was any company I could invest in, yeah, it would be by far my number. Like I would sell, despite me thinking that like I'm in a very, very similar ballpark to you in terms of like what I think Tesla will get to by 2030. And even then, I'd probably sell everything and put it in Neuralink.
Yeah. Because of the impact?
Yeah, yeah, like impact in every form. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I get what I tend to tell people. What I tell people is, so I love Tesla and I love Boring Company, but for me, SpaceX and Neuralink are more exciting. I got into Elon probably. I mean, I've been a PayPal customer for a very long time, but I feel like my mic's too loud. Test.
Fine for me.
No, not for you. It's for them.
Oh, gotcha.
The audience. So SpaceX for me was sort of I mean, I've been a PayPal customer since 2003, if not before, and I made over $1 million in revenue selling legal services on PayPal. So I love PayPal, right? But I wasn't excited about PayPal like it's changing the world. It was useful. So SpaceX to me was like mind blowing, and to me, SpaceX takes us off this rock, right? It's like Tesla and Boring Company make life better on the rock. SpaceX takes us off the rock, and Neuralink expands human consciousness. SpaceX takes humanity into space, and Neuralink expands what humanity is. So I think it's really, really I'm not saying that I'm not excited about Tesla. I
Right,
invested
yeah.
a lot of money in Tesla, so I'm really excited about Tesla. And I'm really excited about the Boring Company because I just think it's cool. But it's cool, like, okay, that's cool. It's not game changing for humanity. It just makes the planet a better place to live. So
Right.
so let me the last question that I wrote down for you is, what are some of the wildest possibilities for Neuralink? The things that like blow people, that would really blow people's. I'll drop mine in a minute, but what do you think?
It's weird because I actually like don't really know of hardly any science fiction. And so there's like it's weird because like with Neuropod, about half the audience or more is coming in kind of from that angle, and I'm kind of coming in from like the Elon Musk slash Tesla angle. And I guess I think it'd be really cool to have like brains connected to each other. And so like if you're playing a video game and you have like two people playing against two other people, and each team has their brains like in sync with one another, that'd be pretty interesting. There's like so many different things with like memory too, and so and then like just like how people are feeling. So you can start to like have experiences and almost teleport as well. Like that'd be really cool.
What do you mean by
Yeah.
what do you mean by teleport?
Uh, like imagine in the very long run, like imagine if you could just basically duplicate your brain and put that brain into a robot and send that robot, I don't know, to the top of Mount Everest, then it's like a high likelihood that it's going to survive versus our bodies. I don't know. Like, I don't know if my body would survive climbing Mount Everest. So then if we did that and it was able to read and write, then we could feel and smell and see and hear everything that's going on. And then it is sent, and if that's being fed like to our brains as though like we're there, it's almost like we're teleporting, right? Like it's almost instantaneous teleportation.
Okay, so have you? I'm guessing you don't read a lot of science fiction.
Right. I hardly watch or read or yeah,
Okay,
like
so
any fiction stuff.
so just suggestion for you and for the audience as well. Elon Musk, supposedly Elon's favorite science fiction novels are the Culture series by Ian Banks. I did not put a link in the description below, but maybe I will after we're done. And in the Culture series, there's this concept called neural lace that people have sort of like neural implants that they may not have known about. Sometimes they know about it. Sometimes they're not aware it's there. But something in their brains that does things like Elon talks about save state. You know, that you're every night when you go to bed, save state, and then the next morning, the next day if you die, then you can revert to your save state and you're still alive. But I think let me bounce off to you, big idea, which is you take your consciousness like you sort of described, you upload it to the cloud, you download it onto some sort of robotic being or other biological being, and you do 1,000 of them, and you put them on 1,000 starships, and you send them off to 1,000 different stars. And you maybe have more than one, and they're in a let's say a robot that's not going to die on the journey, and you're in sort of like a sleep state, right? Your consciousness is in a sleep state for the journey, so it takes 100 years to get to Alpha Centauri. But then the ship arrives at Alpha Centauri, and you can hear, right? You can see. Now, I'm not saying that this is not like the teleportation. The you back on Earth might already be dead, and even if you're alive, you're not going to be receiving the information that your consciousness receives in Alpha Centauri. But it's almost like you've replicated your consciousness, and your consciousness is able to go all over the place. Does that sound reasonable? Too crazy?
It's so tough to like determine what's reasonable or not. Like any of these things right now are just so far off into the future. But yeah, like assuming they're successful in like doing what they say that they're going to do, then in theory all of these things are possible.
Right.
And
So
yeah, like controlling time, like yeah, like how you perceive time, you're basically controlling it. So I think that's possible.
and then the other thought I had, I'm going to dive into my Patreon supporter questions soon. I had this thought. I didn't write this down. I didn't mention this to you, but it was this thought that was bothering me is, so our brains have been subjected to machine learning since we were children, since we were babies, in a form, right? Our neurons have been trained to process things in a certain way. And for those people who don't know this, there's a concept called neuroplasticity, which is, in a sense, your brain's ability to learn. And at least most of us think that the children have much more neuroplasticity. They're much more capable of learning. And as we get older, we lose some neuroplasticity. So one of the concerns I have is that as we develop Neuralink, it may be that old brains like mine, especially if I have to wait 10 years for my Neuralink, that old brains like mine will not find it as easy to adapt to the Neuralink. I won't be able to take full advantage of a Neuralink implant because my brain won't be as flexible. Does that sound reasonable? Or, maybe we won't be able to train and maybe even for younger people, like you'd almost have to put the Neuralink in at birth, right? Or in the womb, so that you could start training the brain early. I actually have this thought, like, so I have children, and when my kids were in elementary school, it was like, well, do we give them a cell phone, right? Do we give our kids a knife? Because they're a third. When I was 10 years ago, let's say, it wasn't common for third graders to have a cell phone, right? At a certain point now, it's like first graders have a cell phone, right? But like, there's this sort of judgment call. Do you let your kid have a cell phone? They're going to spend too much time on their phone, blah, blah, blah. And you try to take a cell phone away from a kid, it's like you're trying to remove part of their brain, right? It's like bizarre that, they've taken it for granted. This is part of how they live their lives. So will we have this battle over at what age do we let our kids have Neuralink?
Right. Yeah, probably. I mean, like Elon described it, our connection to our phone as whenever we don't have it on us, we feel like we have missing limb syndrome.
Yeah.
And it's so true because it's almost like another portion of our body, and it just becomes so integrated in our daily life. And it's actually like one of the things that I'm most skeptical about Neuralink is like how fast it's going to make somebody be able to process information. Like I'm not convinced that it's going to help us drastically improve the processing speed. I mean, maybe in the long run it will, but especially at the beginning, like people are talking about like downloading a new language or learning like jujitsu immediately.
That was in the chat, Kung Fu.
Okay, yeah. So let's say like if somebody theorizes that we could download like a Kung Fu lesson, I think it'd be similar to how it is today with like YouTube or Coursera or Udemy or wherever. Like the information is available, and if it were free, like we could probably download the lessons. And if the interface were quicker, then we could maybe we could listen at like 3 times speed and watch the video at 3 times speed. But then still, like we have to process it. So I guess I just haven't figured out like how that processing accelerates, and maybe there are ways that Neuralink will enable that speed to improve, but I just don't see it right now.
You put a Neuralink in a black belt's brain, and you learn how his signals fire when he's doing his karate moves or kung fu moves, and then you queried the fleet. You do that for 100 martial artists, and then you train the other humans' brains how to do that, I suppose. All right, so we've gotten through my big questions.
Okay.
And we got about a half hour left before you've got to go. So this is from my Patreon supporters. What is the biggest health benefit that you see? For example, cancer, blindness, superior knowledge. What do you see is the biggest health benefit? The thing that's going to make the most difference for the most people.
I'm not sure how many people like have each of these neurologic diseases. So like, but I guess it's just like area under the curve. Like how many people, and then how much of a negative impact does the disease have on them, right? So, and then you just like integrate and figure out the area under the curve. But I mean, I guess for me personally, like Alzheimer's would just destroy me. Like if I had Alzheimer's or my mom had Alzheimer's, it was just like
I guess I would say
I empathize with.
I guess I would say Alzheimer's and dementia probably affect the most people, and they have a very, very profound effect. because when you get older, that's like a really, really huge impact on a large number of people. That would be, I guess that would be my answer if they can cure that. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Do you think heart disease is probably the biggest killer in the world? Do you think Neuralink could help with heart disease? Could it get me to stop eating bad food, and could it get people to stop smoking? Because that would do it.
Right. Yeah, that's a very real thing. With like it could help with addiction or depression, just because like the natural instinct or the instinct that you have to like smoke, to like shut that off right away.
Yeah. All right, great. Okay, so which I think I already know the answer to this question, what your answer will be, and I know what my answer is. Which brain disease or which thing do you think will be cured first? Where do you think the first medical fix will be?
Well, you go first.
I'll give you
just
mine
think
first.
about
So I would say it's a toss up between blindness and paralysis. It seems clear that they're working on paralysis first, but taking the next step to, I mean, helping paralyzed people control objects on a computer screen, control cursor or whatever, is the first target, and we know the monkey can do it, so it's very likely that'll be the first thing. Helping blind people see is probably the next target or one of the next targets, but that requires sending signals into the brain, and that may be a bigger challenge. So my gut would be helping paralyzed people do something they couldn't do before. Not necessarily walk, right? Exactly. But to do something.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So now let me read this. This is a longer question from one of my Patreon supporters. Right now with the monkey, we are recording what the brain would have wanted to do, and then sending that sensory information as an output to controlling an external device. How far-fetched is it instead to have the input of an external device conform to the way your brain processes light, touch, smell, sound, and send that back to the brain as a sensory input? So in the beginning, you could no longer have smart glasses, you would have smart eyes. In the far future, we're talking about possibly of a matrix world. So I think this is about that question about putting input into the brain. So you sort of mentioned this with, I would say it's almost like a haptic feedback, right? If you wore a glove on your hand and you actually had no sensation in your hand, but there was a Neuralink reading pressure on the glove, maybe that could go into the brain. Is that what do you think? Do you think it's likely we're going to have that? It seems to me that's likely to happen. There would be some input into the brain, like the optic nerve or the optic visual cortex. How else do you see that coming into play?
Exactly. Yeah. Like if somebody is paralyzed and they want to like pick up a cup, then they can probably do it. But there's really, at least right now, how I understand it, it seems like there's no like feedback, right? So like they don't know exactly how harsh or how hard they're grabbing it. And so in the future, if you have that input, that's really beneficial for so many different applications, because then like all of a sudden you're no longer limited to just grabbing little things. Like you can probably type much more quickly. You can just do many more things.
Okay. All right, let me just take a note. I want to ask you this. There's a good question here that I want to get through my Patreon supporter questions first. So this is the last question I have from, well, actually, there's 3 questions from the Patreon supporter. So question number 1 is, can Neuralink improve thoughts, states of being, and skills like creativity, analysis, reasoning, evaluation, interpreting data, insight, morality, values, reference, right and wrong, feelings of contentment and happiness, drive and hard work, industrious, risk-taking, stewardship, and any other complex? I'm going to skip over. Do you think Neuralink can have that broad of an effect on the way we think?
It could probably take input from somebody else to, like, let's say Elon uploaded his, like how he, or let's say they were able to understand how Elon thought about like certain things, and then eventually got a better sense of like what motivates him. Then I suppose in theory, like you could just put that Elon motivation package, and download it into anybody's brain. But
so that's his secret. That's his secret plan. His secret plan is to create more Elons.
I do think that's like one of the most profound things that he's done, is just like being able to inspire so many people to think similar to how he does. It's just like really incredible how many people are either an investor and therefore like now capable of starting a new business, or a former employee and are able to understand like how he thinks and therefore able to start a new business. It's like, are you familiar with the PayPal mafia
Yeah, yeah,
phenomena? It's
sure.
like, to me, it's like the Elon mafia, like there's just so many people that he's enabled or inspired.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So
that
I would,
GDP alone
I,
exceeds like most countries.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but I have this saying, we need to be like Elon. So I have become wealthy. I'm not saying I'm like as wealthy as Elon or anywhere, even in, I'm better off. And if the stock goes to where you and I think it's going to go, by the way, my price target for 2030 is around 40. But I wouldn't call it a price target. I think Tesla could go to $40,000 a share by 2030. You think 60,000?
Yeah, yeah. Like in my model, it's so tough to model out because you almost get like, but in short, yes, I think 60 is pretty reasonable.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
So, if it goes to 10,000, I'm going to have a lot more money than I know what to do with. And I feel like it's our obligation to, having learned from Elon as well as made money because of what Elon has done, it's our obligation to go out and do something like he did, to not just sit on the back of a yacht sipping a drink, right? He could have done that. He could have bought the yacht, sat on the back of the yacht, sipping a drink. He said, no, I want to make the world a better place. So not just go make money, right? Because I'm already going to have enough money that I don't need to worry about money. It's about how can I look at the world and say, this could be better. I could make this problem better. I was actually talking to a friend of mine who's another Tesla investor, lives in Miami, and he and I have been meeting probably once a month, just sort of talking random stuff. And we just sort of both kind of hit on this idea. We're thinking about building an apartment building, like trying to rethink, how do you build an apartment building?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you, not just the apartment building itself, but how do you build life around for the people living in the apartment? Like maybe we can build an apartment building and buy a Tesla minibus, like when the minibus comes out. And we build it near a university, but not like right at the university. So we can charge less money. We can build it for less money and charge less for rent. And of course, we have a Starlink and we have solar and everything to make it more efficient. But then, like, the bus takes people to school, or it's I kind of have this vision. It's between University of Central Florida and Canaveral. So you can serve Canaveral and you can serve University of Central Florida with the same property. And we build an alpha prototype, and then we build a beta prototype, and then we start building a large number of these buildings. But the focus is, okay, how do we build this for less money? How do we build this so it's more efficient? How do we build this so it provides better quality experience for the user, right? The renter. I think that's an obligation that we all have. So I'm talking too much. I do this. I talk too much. All right, let me go back to the questions.
That's fine.
So, but I share your view that we need to take that and go beyond just making the money. We have to do something with it. Okay. So next question from the same Patreon supporter: can my legs be programmed to dunk a basketball? My lungs to run a marathon like Forrest Gump? My muscles to do heavy workouts, etc., all without mental fatigue or resistance. What are your thoughts on that? Is that conceivable?
No, I don't think so. I think like the mind is really powerful, right? Like we can kind of trick ourselves right now to like do much more than we currently feel we're capable of. But I mean, it's like if I tried to play an NBA basketball game at the speed and capability that those like NBA players do, I would get tired. Like no matter how much my brain was tricked to keep going, like
Yeah.
my lungs just probably wouldn't be able to handle it.
Yeah, so I guess my take on that would be, you might be able to use Neuralink to help you train your body better so that your muscles
Right.
are physically more ready to do the things we're talking about. And I also think, so I'm 6 foot tall, and at my peak, when I was 20 years old, let's say, I could grab the rim. I couldn't dunk I dunked a volleyball once. I never got to the point of dunking a basketball. But there are people who are 6 foot tall who can dunk. And to some extent, it's like that's the other thing. I don't think Neuralink will ever be able to convert slow twitch muscles to fast twitch muscles. So you have a certain percentage of, supposedly, I'm not claiming I understand the human physiology, but I think to some extent, some people have muscles, like marathon runners tend to have slower twitch muscles, and sprinters have fast twitch muscles. And the guy who's dunking a basketball has really good fast twitch muscles. And I don't think that Neuralink is going to be able to convert your slow twitch muscles to fast twitch muscles. So there's going to be some physical limitations on what you're going to be able to do. But it might help you train better, and it might help you to learn. Like you'll get Neuralink in in a great, so think about somebody who's a great basketball dunker, like Derek Jones Jr. He used to be with the Miami Heat. He's with somebody else now. They call him airplane mode.
Yeah.
Maybe you can have a Neuralink in Steph Curry's brain, and you can learn exactly how his neurons fire when he's shooting a basketball, and you can train that into your brain, and you can shoot better. But it's probably not going to be quite as good, and you're probably going to need I don't know whether it can train muscle memory. I don't know if that's going to go with it. If muscle memory really is muscle memory. All right, but anyway, I think you and I kind of agree on that. All right, the last question from the Patreon supporter: if we all get Neuralinks, will poverty finally be eliminated? Will there be peace and cooperation worldwide and no religious rivalries or wars?
This is kind of a philosophical debate. Like, some people were speculating, like, okay, if we have general artificial intelligence, then who determines what the right and wrong is for the world? Right? Like, who determines what ethics are? And
yeah,
I think that's a really important question, because it's like, if you were born in, I don't know, Southern California or Central Florida or like Taiwan or Australia, it's like everybody's cultural differences play a role in like how they view ethics and everything. So it's just really tough to have like universal good and bad. And so I don't think it will be able to solve that.
Okay. So there was a question in the chat before that has scrolled away, but the question was basically, or the comment was something along the lines of that Neuralink is a step towards mind control. That if you have a Neuralink in your brain, then somebody else will be able to control you. Do you think that's a risk?
It is, but it's so minimal, in my opinion, and the pros like far outweigh the cons. Like corporations just like have no big incentive to like misbehave in any way. They have too much to lose in most cases.
Okay. So there's a question here, which I think goes along with what we were talking about earlier, but I'll just ask the question because I think it's a pretty good question. We're out of Patreon. I'm looking at the chat now. Will there be a stock for Neuralink? I think that comes down to the question: will Neuralink IPO? And if Neuralink will IPO, when do you think that would be? Do you think it will IPO, and if so, when?
If they didn't merge with X, an X company never happened. Maybe I don't think it wouldn't surprise me if they never IPO, because like Elon's so against like public companies. But then how SpaceX did with Starlink, or SpaceX is gonna do with Starlink, maybe Neuralink will do something similar in the future. Because like it wouldn't surprise me if they eventually get into like so many different like genomics or prosthetics, or so like just so many different things they could get into. And maybe they spin off one of those divisions eventually.
Yeah. So my theory on this is that Elon doesn't want to let something spin off if he wants control of something until the engineering is done and it works and it's profitable and it's demonstrated a solid business model. So SpaceX, like the Mars, I don't think the Mars mission will ever be IPO'd. There will always be a core of SpaceX that is a private company because he doesn't want to subject the Mars colony project to public shareholder control. Unless I guess if he owns more than 50% of the shares, he can do it. So Starlink, you spin off Starlink. The problem is that you have investors. Like right now, Neuralink doesn't really have outside investors. It's got employees who own shares, I think, but it doesn't have outside investors. Boring Company has outside investors, but Neuralink does not, to my knowledge. Do you think? I don't think Neuralink has any outside investors. Do you?
Like, how do you quantify outside investors? I think they do have investors that are not Elon.
Okay. I mean, there's no funding round in Crunchbase. Boring Company has a funding round. There was never been a funding round that's at least not public. I think Elon just funded it, and so I think he's paying a lot of employees in shares. And then the question is, well, the question is whether it's investors or it's employees, and they've got shares. It's like, how do they get value out of their shares? And one of the principal ways that startup companies deliver that, ultimately value to their employees, where they make money on all their work, is there's an IPO, and they're able to sell their shares they're able to sell some shares to the public, and that's how they're able to move on to a successful life otherwise. So I think there has to be an IPO at some point. I agree with you. It could be like the IPO a spinoff, but keep a core company private. I actually think the Robotaxi network could spin off from Tesla. That even though it's already public, I could see Tesla spinning off that. Let me just see. Sorry, let me go to other questions because we got 20 minutes left.
Okay.
Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I can go a little bit longer too. I mean, I do think also with the private company and needing access to liquidity, I think tender offers are like starting to gain quite a bit more traction, and therefore like people can just keep doing like mini rounds in the form of offers like that, and then employees will get enough liquidity.
Right. I mean, well, so like I think SpaceX just did a roughly $1 billion funding round, so you can get $1 billion in, but if you want to raise 50 billion, I think you need to IPO, right? I think larger. I mean, maybe there's enough money out there, private money, to do that. I don't know. So here's a question from Gary. Gary asks, have Neuralink researchers started to investigate the links between gut microbiome messenger microbes to brain processes? I'm going to go with a no on that, but what do you think?
I doubt it, but I don't have any insider info.
And thank you for your support, Gary. Damien asks, could Neuralink put you in a virtual reality world without a VR headset?
Probably. I think so.
I think that's definitely an idea that would make sense. Or there's another one from the same guy, Damien. Thank you for following, Damien. Could Neuralink do augmented reality on our field of vision without the need for glasses, like a heads-up display?
Probably, but it would be tricking your brain, right? Like you wouldn't actually be able to see something else. It would just be like you're just receiving the input from something else.
Yeah, I would say it probably wouldn't need to display it in a text form in your field of view. It would probably, you would see an object and you would get the information without having to see it visually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Like our eyes are just sensors, and we happen to be connected to those sensors, but we could have like a different sensor that's sending similar information. Yeah.
Sorry. I just laughing at this question. Will the first place to serve drinks on Mars be called the Mars Bar? I like it. All right, let me see if there's other questions in here. What do you have questions for me? That's a question I have for you.
I do. Do you have the dunking of volleyball on your resume? Did that help you as a lawyer?
I do not have dunking a volleyball on my resume, but my big bragging thing is that I got paid to go to Stanford.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I graduated from college and I went to graduate. I was looking at what to do next, and I got into Duke Law School. And my father wanted me to go to Duke Law School, and it was going to cost a ridiculous amount of money. And I had this professor pushing me to go to graduate school, and he got me to apply to this program at Stanford Business School's I got paid to go to Stanford Business School, not just Stanford Business School. They had a PhD program, and I applied to this program. It was really a political science program called political economics. But when you got into that program, you got funded, so your tuition was paid, and they paid me like, I don't know, $15,000 a year. So I got paid to go to Stanford. I got a master's degree. I didn't finish the PhD, but I got a master's degree. Here's a question. Would Neuralink eliminate the need for drugs?
No. I think there's a lot of things that they will get into that are probably similar to pharmaceuticals. Because like the brain is not just electric signals, it's also like chemical information. And so yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that they can do with just the electric signals, because it will cause like some of the chemical things to occur, and then like, okay, well then you basically only need the electric stuff, but there's many different things that I think drugs will still help with.
Okay. So really quick, Turkey Day asks, Warren, did you participate in SpaceX funding rounds? So let me ask you that question first, Ryan. Did you participate in any SpaceX funding rounds, or do you own any SpaceX stock?
I don't want to comment on it.
Okay. So I will answer for myself. I have not taken I did have an opportunity to buy SpaceX stock or to invest in a fund that held only SpaceX stock. And the cost of participating in that was so high. It was like a 6% commission, 2% a year management fee, and then 20% carried interest, which means they take 20% off the top at the end. That I decided I might as well just buy Tesla stock. I don't think SpaceX grows more than Tesla. If there was an opportunity to buy SpaceX stock that was reasonably priced, even with some expenses like that, I would. I am working on possibly creating a fund. That's the idea behind this shirt, that would invest in either Boring Company or Neuralink. Right now I'm looking at Boring Company, but it's at an early stage. When do you think, this is a question for you, Ryan, when do you think Neuralink will demonstrate a telepathic conversation?
Pure speculation, but probably after 2035.
Okay. So can this is a question. I think we sort of talked about this earlier. Can the wires reach deep in the temporal lobe? The demos so far seem to be on the surface areas. To be specific, my understanding is technically right now they're only going 3 millimeters in. I don't know how deep the temporal lobe is. So, I mean, if the temporal lobe is near the surface of the brain, no big deal. You could put the Neuralink here if you had to, right? You could put it here. You wouldn't necessarily want to for cosmetic reasons, but you could put it, anywhere. Ideally, you would have put it somewhere in the hairline.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. I just quickly Googled, and it looks like the temporal lobe is on the side. I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable about the brain enough to know.
Okay. Let's see what we got here. Is it called cochlear? Are cochlear implants a type of Neuralink only through the auditory nerve in your ear? Is that a fair comparison? Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's pretty similar. I also think like a pacemaker is relatively similar. Like, I think a lot of times when I'm trying to explain Neuralink to somebody who's like totally or who's like very religious and therefore believes that it's really not good to have a chip in your brain, then I'll say like, okay, well, like there are some use cases that are extremely similar to like what we have today with like a pacemaker is relatively similar.
Yeah.
And in theory, like if the company were a bad actor and they put that into you, then yeah, like they could kill you immediately if the company was really acting poorly.
Yeah. Okay. This is a great question. I love this question, Skyline. Thank you. Will Neuralink need access to every neuron to copy the human brain?
I don't think Neuralink even knows if this is true. Like, there's just so much that we don't know about the brain, and there are companies that have done so much with so little information, and they know there are like I think it's 100 billions of neurons, and they're able to do quite a bit with only like 100 electrodes, something very, very small.
Yeah.
So I think the answer is no.
I'll take a stab at this question.
Okay.
So there are neurons that are deeper in the brain that control functions like your heart beating and make sure your heart beats or make sure that you breathe. Consciousness is probably at a different part of the brain. So I think the question is, what in the brain do you want to copy? I don't think that there's a need to copy the software to make your heart pump. I don't think there's a need to copy the software that makes your lungs breathe. I think that's something that if you had to, you could program that without copying the neurons. I think that the consciousness is probably, whatever consciousness is probably a relatively small part of the brain. It's probably 10 to 20% of the neurons, or maybe it's 50% of the neurons, but it's certainly not all of them. Does that sound in the ballpark of correct to you?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I wish I knew. I don't know.
Okay. This is a good one. Would Neuralink users be endangered by EMF, microwaves, airport scanners, magnetic fields, etc.?
They just talked about this on their website. Yeah, I can't pull it up quickly, but there's a reference to it on their website, and it just signals to me that they're aware that could be an issue. And so like that, to me, that's like the biggest thing is like with any risk, as long as you're aware of the risk, then it's like there's no risk, because you're going to address it. The problem is when there's a fire, but you don't know there's a fire. And so, yeah, in this scenario, I think they'll address anything that's related to it.
Right. So I'm going to go with this one, even though I probably shouldn't. Damien asks, can a Neuralink make sex sensations more spectacular? Damien, I would suggest watching one of the recent Joe Rogan interviews with Elon, where they talked about hitting the pleasure center. I do think that you know, it seems like all new technology ultimately is used for porn, so somehow it will be used for porn.
Yeah, exactly. Like the porn industry or the defense industry. Yeah, somehow. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's see. You could, in theory, give a command for the dog to sit or stay, and it actually sits or stays based on permissions. Okay, you have mind control for dogs. Um, let's see. All right, we're at 10:20. Could you copy portions of the brain without understanding how they work? Pretty sure that's a no, but what do you think about that, Ryan?
Um, I actually think, well, okay, so I guess for the specific question, no. Uh, but there's like a lot about the brain that I think is so intriguing. And one of the things is just like the efficiency that the brain has. And so like even right now, like if society were able to have a computer that was like incredibly powerful, like as powerful as the brain, like it still wouldn't be nearly as efficient. So I think in the future it'll take like a really, really long time until we have any of the brains in the same amount of efficiency.
Okay. You kind of broke up there, but I think we're back. So let's see if we have any other questions. So this is the sex thing keeps coming up. Wouldn't people be orgasming all the time? So the answer to your question, Stevie Lee, is again, watch the Elon Musk interview with Joe Rogan. There was there's these stories, and there's some woman that they, I think, accidentally put something in her brain that hit the pleasure center, and she just hit a button, and it basically gave her an orgasm. And watch the Joe Rogan interview with Elon Musk. It's sad but hilarious at the same time.
That wasn't how I remembered them talking about it, but definitely I recommend watching that as well.
Yeah. So you can still use a stimulus while having a chip in your brain and it not hurt you or the chip of the brain. And while using the drugs, will this chip help? So about the drugs thing, because somebody said this before, I think that there are psychiatric conditions that Neuralink might be able to help. That and psychiatric drugs, generally speaking, don't work very well. They work to some extent, but they don't work very well. So it's very possible that Neuralink will help people with psychiatric problems that currently use medication that may or may not work well, and it may solve some of those problems. At the same time, Neuralink may help us understand the brain better and learn which drugs will actually help solve other problems. So on the one hand, they may reduce the need for certain drugs that don't work that well, but at the same time, especially combined with genomics, may help deliver better drugs more effectively and accomplish more. Does that sound close to right, Ryan?
Yep, like the drugs that are used currently for things like depression, maybe those will be eliminated. But like you said, like some of those other ones, like we could learn more about how the brain works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and so if anybody follows Jordan Peterson or knows about Jordan Peterson is a YouTube famous and otherwise famous clinical psychology professor from Canada who's now like this speaker and author, and I'm a big fan of his. But he had a problem with benzodiazepines, which is a drug that regulates moods, and I think I'm very, very anti-medicine right now. There's a problem that seniors that they start, every doctor gives you a different drug, and all of a sudden you're taking a cocktail of 10 different drugs, and there's a problem called polypharmacy where you're taking so many drugs you don't necessarily know how they're all going to interact with each other, and the fewer drugs you take the better. So if Neuralink can help reduce the number of drugs people need to take, that would be fantastic. Question from last cast: will you be able to store memories and transfer those memories from person to person?
Yes, because the way I see it, it'd be basically like a video, right? Like right now, we could take a video of something happening, and then I could send that to you, and then you could watch it. Well, in the future, it could just be like a video, except instead of just audio and the visual component, it'd be also like smell, feel, and like the all the senses, and then it'd be transferred like very quickly.
Cool. All right. So here's a question. How plausible would it be to have Neuralink influence bodily function like sweating, fight or flight response, circadian rhythm? Do you see Neuralink potentially helping people with those?
Yes, like anything that's related to yeah, that's related to the brain, I think is fair game in the
And,
long run.
and this question, will Neuralink allow me to know if another human has Neuralink, and can we communicate? I guess my answer to that question was you'd probably be able to set your Neuralink to either open or close. Like, it's kind of like, what is it called? What do you do with your phone where you can share AirDrop? You would like, you can turn your phone's AirDrop on or off. You could probably turn on or off whether or not you're open to communicating with other Neuralinks walking by, or you might have like yes Neuralink communication to some people but not others. Like, you could block people, right?
Yeah.
You'd want to block people, right?
Yeah, I mean that sounds right. Yeah.
Okay. I don't really understand this question completely, but can people live in underground bunkers built by the Boring Company and only control robot avatars on the surface? I'm not sure I would want to live that life. That might make sense on Mars.
Yeah.
I suppose that's an interesting apocalyptic scenario.
Yeah.
Right now, Neuralink uses actual inputs to map to the primary motor cortex, but in someone with paralysis, you can't do that. How does the Neuralink control on paralysis in that situation? Skyline, I don't understand your question. Do you understand that question?
No, I was literally gonna ask you to repeat it. Yeah.
It says right now, Neuralink uses actual inputs to map. Skyline, I think you might be wrong in your assumption. Rodney says Jordan Peterson is a charlatan. Okay, read his book and then tell me that. Don't tell me what other people think about Jordan Peterson. Watch what he says. Tell me where he's got wrong. Or I'm sorry to defend Jordan Peterson, but I feel that just like I defend Elon, I defend Jordan Peterson. Don't just go with he's a charlatan. That's nonsense. Tell me what he's got wrong, and don't do it on the chat because it's not really relevant. In the future, will dope dealers be selling you illegal type Neuralinks? Will there be like cheat codes for Neuralink?
I think it's going to be relatively easy to know if you're getting a Neuralink implant or not, because like you'd have to go in and do the procedure. So, I mean,
yeah, but somebody could set up like a black market clinic with like Chinese, what do you call? Everybody accuses. I do not accuse the Chinese of this, by the way, but everybody accuses the Chinese of like stealing intellectual property. So some third-rate Chinese company creates like a cheap version of Neuralink, and they have like their own surgery center, and you go medical tourism, and you get a cheap Neuralink installed in China. Would you want that?
I mean, I personally wouldn't, but I feel like there will be some form of competition, in the way that like people kind of compete with Tesla right now. Like there will probably be competitors.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I only brought up Jordan. I'm getting a lot of comments about Jordan Peterson. I only brought him up because of the benzodiazepine thing. I am a fan, whatever. So, let's see. They don't. What is he saying? Sorry, let me just find. I'm trying to. Do you ever watch Black Mirror?
I don't. I've heard so much about it.
I feel like I need to. I've watched a couple of Black Mirror episodes. I feel like I need to watch more. There's a TV show just related to this. There's a TV show on Amazon called Upload, which is really awful.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's like basically this guy dies, and but before he dies, his brain is uploaded to the cloud. And the way I'm sorry to ruin that first episode for you, but the way they do the upload is they actually like destroy your head. They like literally scan your head in a destructive manner to scan everything in your head, and that gets uploaded to the cloud, and you wake up in the cloud. And the cloud is you're in like this resort. You're in like this resort hotel. And it's really stupid, but at the same time it's kind of an interesting take. Like you're walking around, and if you're on a high-end plan, you don't get ads. But if you're on a low-end plan, you walk around and you keep seeing Taco Bell ads, or KFC Taco Bell ads, and all these companies have merged. And if you're on a low-end plan and you use too much data, you like go to sleep for the rest of the month.
Oh my gosh.
So it's kind of interesting. I think it's not credible, but it's kind of interesting. So somebody asks, theoretically, can you be hacked and forced to do or say things?
Theoretically, yeah.
Yeah. Most likely, my gut is whenever people say, well, the Tesla FSD could be hacked and someone could take control of the car. Well, first of all, that's probably possible with current cars now. But if I'm relying on any company that's going to be any CEO and any team that's going to be best prepared to prevent or anticipate what the hackers are going to do, I'm going to say Elon Musk and Andrej Karpathy are probably two of the people I would most want, and probably the people working at Neuralink are the same way. Doesn't Elon do like hackathons where it's like, see if you can hack into our Model 3, and if you succeed, you get it? Doesn't he do things like that?
Yep.
So he's very proactive at anticipating what hackers are going to do and be prepared for it. So if we all had Neuralinks during the COVID-19 pandemic, would Neuralinks be able to monitor everyone's body vitals and prevent you from coming into contact with other people who have COVID-19 symptoms? Interesting. I guess you could... That goes to this question of, do you have medical privacy anymore, which I would say we don't. But if you had privacy, presumably you could preclude your Neuralink from telling other people you have a disease. What do you think about that prospect?
Right. Yeah. Like, I think you could just put it like airplane mode, like you just shut it off from communicating with whoever would be receiving the information.
Well, but specifically, so a lot of people don't seem to realize this. I was in college when the AIDS epidemic was like really surging. And we had this law in the United States called HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act or something like that.
Yeah.
Health information, whatever it is. And the idea was that people who had HIV shouldn't be forced to let other people know that, because people would be prejudiced against them. And that was a liberal cause, right? That was a liberal cause to protect healthcare privacy. And now the supposedly liberal cause is to prevent you from protecting your healthcare privacy. So we're in a very interesting world. Sorry, I have criticism of conservatives if we get there. I'm picking on liberals at the moment. Ask me about wars and you'll get me going on conservatives. Will married people be able to merge their minds with Neuralinks? Oh, my wife would not want that.
I don't think they have to be married.
That's true. But what does it mean to, I guess, what would it mean to merge?
I mean, I think it'd be similar to like with our phones right now. Like, we can share quite a bit of information, and with the brain machine interface, like the interface would just be quicker.
Yeah,
so anything that we could share with our phones, like basically that would be it.
Okay, can Neuralink monitor someone that could be on house arrest to stop them violating their leaving their home? It's an interesting application. That's to me, that's a little scary. That's like, do you want the government to have control of your body? I don't like that idea.
I mean, maybe for people who have been in jail, or like, I don't know, in a specific scenario, then it wouldn't surprise me if that happened. But
so
I don't know. I think it's pretty unlikely.
So here's the deal. So you can imagine the scenario where, listen, we're going to put you in jail, but if you agree to have this Neuralink and we can control your movements, then you don't have to be in jail. Well, so that sounds like a good idea until you realize, well, then they'll just make everything illegal. Right? Then they make everything illegal. Jaywalking is now a felony that puts you in prison. But if you wear this thing on if you give us control of your Neuralink, then you don't have to go to jail anymore. That you have to. I'm sorry, this is libertarian Warren sneaks out every once in a while. If you create I just had this conversation like just before we came on. I was in Clubhouse. When you give government power over you, like power, you create a law. Just imagine, do you want a guy with a high school diploma and a few hours of training and a gun to confront your child or you because they think you violated some law that I think is a bullshit law? Excuse my French. It's easy to say, well, that should be illegal. Then the second question is, because as a criminal defense lawyer, I frequently encounter people who are unhappy that their child is being treated this way by the police. And I say, well, did you vote for a politician who said we got to be tough on crime? Yeah, well, they're doing what you said. Well, I didn't mean my daughter. They didn't know who you meant. This is the lies that we're fed. But we're going off I'm sorry, it's loosely related to Neuralink. But all right, I don't see any other questions yet. I'll ask you again. Anything else you want to talk about? Any other questions you have for me?
I definitely do. I definitely would like to chat about Tesla at some point.
Let's talk about Tesla. What's on your mind about Tesla?
I guess I'm curious, like, what do you think about Tesla Energy and, like the software component of Tesla Energy?
Okay, so actually, I just had this conversation also. So I'm waiting on Solar Roof.
Yeah.
I believe I'm going to have a solar roof. I don't know the final pricing. The final pricing may make it not sensible, but I'm waiting to see what the final pricing is, which I should know in a week or two. So one of the advantages that I didn't think about before and I just learned about recently is commercial customers have different pricing depending on the time of day. So in California, for example, I believe it's from 4 to 9 p.m. The electricity price is double normal. Okay? For residential customers, they don't do that, but apparently in Florida at least, you can opt into that, which means you'd pay a lower rate for electricity in regular hours and then a higher rate during peak hours. So if you had power walls, then you could charge the power walls during the low rate time and then expend the power walls during the high rate time. And so the software component is knows when the price is high and uses the power wall electricity then. And of course, you're using solar to feed the power wall means you're using even less electricity from the grid, but your electricity bill is actually lower than you think because it's generating a certain amount of electricity, but it's using that electricity to save you from the high price time. So,
Mhm.
so that's an example of it. There's the auto bidder side of it, which I think auto bidder is overrated when you get to, it's very valuable right now because there are times with very, very high peak demand where the peaker plants come on and you're saving a lot of money by switching to that. But over time, we're going to get to a world where we have basically only solar and wind and maybe some baseline power from some other things. And I think the arbitrage opportunities will be a lot less. So I don't think that will add up to be that big of a deal in the future, but at the same time, I could be wrong. What do you think about that?
Yeah, in the very long run, I think that's true. And then for the application with Powerwall, like that's one of the initial selling points is like being able to have that offset.
Okay. How much do you think it will cost to get a Neuralink?
At the beginning, probably 50,000, like something high.
Yeah.
And then in the long run, like Elon aspires for it to be close to LASIK, and LASIK, I guess, hovers around like $5,000 or so in the US.
Even 3,000. Yeah, I agree. I'm in the same ballpark. I actually think it might not cost. The early experimental ones are going to cost a lot, but the procedure actually doesn't seem like it's that involved of a procedure. So I think the people, once they get the experiments out of the way, I think it may not cost. I think even 50,000 might be high. So we'll see. I think it might be less than that.
Maybe.
All right. So what will happen first? Mars colony or healthy people getting Neuralink?
I think Mars.
What
do you think?
Well, I think that the beginnings of the Mars colony are before healthy people get Neuralink. I think the millionth person landing on Mars and the millionth person living on Mars is long after Neuralink is healthy people. I think it's going to take 20 plus. I think we're going to have humans on Mars by 2026 or 2029. I think the 2028 one was actually shifts into 2029 by the time they arrive. So I think humans start arriving on Mars before 2030, but then it takes easily 20 and probably more like 30 years to scale up the colony to 1 million people. And I think we'll have healthy people getting Neuralink within 15 years. So I'm hoping.
Yep.
I'm 55 and I want to have my Neuralink by 70. So is there a question you would have liked Warren to have asked you?
Oh, wow. No, I can't think that quickly.
Oh, this is a good one. Could Neuralink encrypt your memories before offloading so only you could access them later? I'm going to say yes on that. What do you think?
Gosh, I'm not sure. I feel like the appropriate answer for most of these is I'm just not sure, but
I totally think it could be a public key private. I could actually see you could even send the memories to someone with public key private key encryption, so only the person with the right private key would be able to unlock the memory.
Yeah, maybe. Sounds possible.
If it's data, it's data. And could you shield any of your thoughts? Oh, sorry. If you merged your mind with someone through Neuralink, would there be no privacy? That person has access to all your thoughts, memories, etc., or would you be able to shield some of your thoughts? I'm going to say that's way too early for us to know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's true. But I also think like there will be different settings, in different amounts that you can toggle on and off.
I think there's just Star Trek episodes when Spock does the Vulcan mind meld. If you haven't anybody's ever watched Star Trek, Spock does this mind meld where he puts his hands on someone's head and he's able to read their mind.
Mhm.
All right, so we're 10 minutes past your hard out. Do you need to go?
Uh, yeah. Do you mind if we punt the rest of the conversation until later?
Yeah, well, I'm out of questions, and
Okay.
so I don't see any new questions from the audience. So let me let you go, and thank you very much for doing this. I'm going to stay on with the audience for another couple minutes, but I'm going to let Ryan go. So,
Okay.
and I'll answer some other questions while you're gone. So Ryan, you can hang
Okay.
up. Thanks very much for coming, and I'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. Really excited to have been on here. Yeah.
Great. All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to stay on for a little bit longer here. Could Neuralink be set to monitor for high blood pressure, onset of diabetes, and all other detectable diseases? Damien, that's a great question. I think the answer is generally yes. I think Neuralink will be able to do some things like that. Um, I think it's early to predict that, but I definitely think something like that will happen. John asks, could Neuralink cure addiction? Uh, John, we talked about that before. We think that Neuralink would be able to help with addiction very much. It's likely that that's something that they will try to fix. We don't know what Neuralink will be able to do yet, and it's also entirely possible that Neuralink just won't be able to accomplish a lot of things that we hope it will be able to accomplish. But it seems likely that it will be able to accomplish that. Um, I don't see any other questions. So before we go, I want to remind people, please support this channel on Patreon. T-shirts. I just added a stainless steel water bottle that has Elon on it. I'm working on one that has the NASA worm logo, but it didn't go on. That one didn't work. Maybe there's a trademark issue or something with that. But check out the T-shirts. We talked about crime a little bit. Buy my book, Fair DUI. Links to all this stuff in the description below. Check out my other videos, and thank you so much for watching.